Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is contributing editor at Mediaite, Sarah Rumpf. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks a lot, Brittany. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, and there is some big media news, so I brought you on to break it down for us. Last week, Washington Post owner Jeff Bezos blocked the paper's editorial board from endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris. On Friday, the Post publisher and CEO William Lewis wrote in an op-ed that the paper is, quote, returning to our roots of not endorsing presidential candidates. There's been significant fallout from this decision. What's your response?
You know, it's one of those things where if you do it ahead of time, it's fine. If you do it in the 11th hour, it smells really bad. And that's the situation we have here. When Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post, he announced that the editorial page would continue to issue opinions and continue to have a variety of views on a variety of topics, but would not endorse any candidates. That would have been fine. If he had announced at the beginning of this election cycle that they were not going to do that anymore. But when you're literally days before the election and you're saying we're not going to issue an endorsement, the outcry is justified, in my opinion, because it starts looking like there's a real game being played here. And when you see it happening with other papers too, the LA Times, USA Today, all happening in October of an election year, when they have issued endorsements in the past, it starts to look like it's something that is specific for this election year, for a specific candidate who has made a lot of comments and has a lot of close allies who have made comments promising to punish the press who criticize him. So it doesn't really feel like people are being real free speech champions out there when they engage in this kind of thing.
And when there's reports that it was essentially the endorsement was written up, it sounded like all they needed to do was press send and publish and it would have gone up, but
Yeah.
It was chopped, like you said, in the 11th hour. Jeff Bezos, I think to your point, caught a lot of heat that this might smell a little funny, and he said that there was no quid pro quo. He also said that he didn't know that Dave Limp, the CEO of his company Blue Origin, was meeting with Donald Trump the exact same day that he decided to axe the endorsement. Coincidence or not, what do you think?
I think that's all true, and it also doesn't really matter. All of those things can be true. Jeff Bezos could have been 100% honest in every single word there. And that's not the point. The point is not that somebody with his company was meeting with Trump. I don't have any problem with that. He's got a bunch of different companies that are engaged in a bunch of different aspects of aerospace travel, commerce, all kinds of things. They want to meet with Donald Trump, go right ahead. It's a free country, they're free citizens, do it. And there doesn't have to be an explicit quid pro quo that we will not endorse, Vice President Kamala Harris, and if you're elected, you will give us X, Y, Z. It does not have to be that explicit. The danger in a lot of these things, and again, forgive me for putting my history nerd hat on, but throughout human history, when fascist movements have risen up, there's a pathway that they travel. And let me be very, very clear. I am not calling Trump Hitler. I am not calling him fascist. But I will say that a lot of the things that he has said and a lot of the things that his close circle have advocated for are things that put you on the path of fascism. And you don't necessarily have to demand a quid pro quo or, try to, throw a newspaper publisher in jail for it to be a problem. The mere aspect of bowing down so that you don't upset the powerful person is the danger here. If a media outlet is afraid to criticize somebody powerful because they're worried about backlash, then their teeth aren't as sharp and their bite's not as strong. And that's the purpose of the free press in this country is to hold the powerful accountable. And if you're afraid to criticize Donald Trump, if you're afraid to praise his opponent, then you're kind of missing the point of being part of the fourth estate in this country.
I hear you. And on Monday evening, Jeff Bezos, he's obviously heard this backlash. He posted an op ed in his paper of his own, and it's entitled this: The Hard Truth Americans Don't Trust the News Media. And this was his defense. This is what he wrote: Presidential endorsements do nothing to tip the scales of an election. What presidential endorsements actually do is create a perception of bias, a perception of non independence. Ending them is a principled decision, and it's the right one. To his point, would a WAPO endorsement of Kamala Harris, is that affecting the swing state voter in Pennsylvania at all? Or does this 11th hour decision just draw attention to the fact that they didn't do it?
Yeah, and again, I think this is something where I can very comfortably say every word he says is right and also misses the point. He's right that the Washington Post endorsement is not going to swing voters. The New York Times endorsement is not going to swing voters on their own. I think that the newspaper endorsements are actually more powerful when it comes to your local community, when they're talking about like my ballot in Orange County, Florida. I'm in Orlando, had a lot of local amendments and county charter amendments. We have state constitutional amendments. We have a school board potential half-penny tax increase. That's where the newspaper endorsements really have sway, because it's harder to get information about those. But where the endorsements matter is, again, in taking a stand, and specifically on the issue of former President Donald Trump, and specifically on the issue of free speech and free press. He has said a lot of things that are extraordinarily troubling. And this is beyond just, he writes mean tweets or mean posts on his True Social account. He has specifically advocated for revoking the broadcast license of networks that criticize him or ask him tough questions. He has specifically advocated for throwing journalists in jail and made jokes that they would be subject to, prison rape, which is not okay for anyone to ever have to experience. This is the kind of rhetoric that comes from Trump and his inner circle, that the free press is an enemy. And what a newspaper's endorsement can do is not necessarily change an individual vote, but be part of the dialogue about the role of the press, the role of what is actually true in this election. There's been a lot of misinformation. I mean, even in his Madison Square Garden speech, when you get past all the racism and sexism and homophobia and anti-Semitism, and you look at some of the things that he was saying, I mean, he was still claiming that there's been no federal aid to North Carolina, which I know is absolutely factually inaccurate. I have family in the area. That's where the newspaper endorsement can come into play, to put a bright spotlight on things that are true and untrue, and to be part of a very important dialogue about what's going on in this country. And again, when you are deciding to stay silent and you're doing it in the 11th hour, and it's specifically an election involving Trump, well, it looks like you are preemptively bowing down before your leader, and it's really shameful.
To your point, do you think then it's fair to say Jeff Bezos, because of this decision, is scared of Donald Trump?
I don't think scared is necessarily a fair word. When you have that level of wealth that the Elon Musks and the Jeff Bezos and the Bill Gates and so on have, there's a point where American laws don't really matter. All of these people can pack up and go to another country. I mean, they literally, and again, I'm not accusing Elon Musk of being a serial killer, but he could go kill people right now this afternoon and then flee to a country that doesn't have extradition to the US and set up a castle there and be fine. Like, there's a point where these individuals don't have to worry about American laws because they can buy their way out of them. And even if it's not to the extreme level of fleeing to a non-extradition country, they have the ability to pay for lobbyists and pay for laws to be changed in ways that's beneficial. So I don't think scared is the right word, but I do think that there is a strong possibility of seeking influence. And again, when fascist systems come into play, it's usually not the guys at the very top that end up hurt. You look at what happened after the USSR broke apart, and how the oligarchs managed to get in good with Putin, their families weren't in breadlines. Their families weren't doing without heating oil in the winter. Their families were jet setting around the French Riviera and enjoying yachts and all the rest of it. So the troubles and the hardships and the shortages that the Russian people are suffering are not happening to the oligarchs and their families. And, Jeff Bezos is never going to go hungry. He's never going to not have a very, very cool yacht and a lot of very, very cool homes with a lot of very luxurious furniture and all the best appliances. And, he can eat caviar every day if he wants. So, there's a point where it's not being scared, but it's seeking influence, and it's seeking to have a smoother path for your business and to gain power and to gain influence. And, some of it might just be sheer capitalist profit seeking, which is fine. Go for it. Some of it may just be ego driven. I think it's more on that sort of realm than scared. There's a point where there's nothing that the American government can do to these people.
I want to talk about how this is affecting the Post's bottom line, because NPR reported that as of Monday afternoon, more than 200,000 people canceled their digital subscriptions, and that, quote, the figure represents about 8% of the paper's paid circulation of roughly 2.5 million subscribers, which includes print as well. The number of cancellations continued to grow Monday afternoon. You hear these numbers, and the media industry, is not, you work in the media industry, so you know what I'm talking about here. So it's a bit touch and go. So you hear this, what do you think?
It's frustrating. I totally understand an individual's decision to cancel their subscription in light of this, but I also deeply sympathize with the people who work at the Washington Post who are pointing out, hey, I've been showing up to my job and reporting, and I've been able to report on these stories that are important, and it's not my fault. There's been a number of people within the Washington Post who have publicly resigned from the editorial board part of their jobs in outrage over this. It's an interesting situation because the Washington Post was in the process of slowly digging itself back up to hopefully turning a profit, but wasn't there yet. And this is a massive step backwards. Like Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter, that's been colossally the opposite of profitable. Jeff Bezos has the kind of financial ability where he could underwrite the Washington Post to be whatever he wanted. They could lose half their subscribers, not just 8%. They could lose half of them and he could still keep it afloat. The question is going to be whether he wants to do that, whether he wants to sell it, whether he wants to try to do something new to gain those subscribers back and gain new subscribers. It's a very complicated question. And, like you alluded to at the beginning of this part here, the media industry is still struggling with how to make a profit and keep us all on salary in this internet age. And then the vast hordes of people who already been on salary and are fighting for freelance pay. It's tough. And, something like this just makes it a lot harder. These newspapers, a lot of them, CNN, Washington Post, they've gone through Wall Street Journal, they've gone through public layoffs over the past recent years. And this is just one more thing that makes it a little bit harder for a company to be profitable. I don't know that there's an easy solution.
What does this say then about the media industry as a whole? Because I saw that Mediaite's editor-in-chief, Ada McLaughlin, was at the MSG rally a few days ago, and when Trump said something out of the press, he reported that he saw a little kid give the press, turn to them and give them double middle fingers. So, it's safe to say that it is a very polarizing time between the press and the American people right now, or how Americans feel about the press, rather. And Bezos wrote, as I said, the hard truth: Americans don't trust the news media. Does his decision here make Americans trust the media more or less?
I think it makes it trust less because the people who are hardcore MAGA were already very critical of the Washington Post. This isn't going to win them over, especially because the individual reporters are all individuals with free thought and free will. and a lot of them have been very critical. If you are a hardcore Trump supporter, you're not going to say, "Yay, let me subscribe to the Washington Post over this." And for the people who are not hardcore Trump supporters, this shook their faith in the Washington Post. That, okay, well, it's not necessarily that they're publishing something that's untrue, but if you are a Harris supporter or just a Trump skeptic and you've seen this play out with the Washington Post, that sends the message that not that they're saying something untrue, but they're willing to hold back something they think is true. They're willing to not publish something they believe is true out of, trying to avoid angering Trump or trying to curry favor. So.
Yes, well, we have an election now in 7 days, as we've been covering now for it has been years, ever since the midterms of 2022. And so I appreciate you coming on with me to having this really important conversation. And Sarah, per usual, you are welcome back anytime. Thank you so much for joining me.
All right. Thanks so much, Brittany.